Well, hello and welcome to this first and something little new with the Ralph Turner Show. It's a book review. And decided to start this because I had come to realize some time ago that there's so many people, adults, some of them college graduates, high school graduates, that claim that they've never actually read a single book all the way through, not even the Bible, since they were either in college or in high school. And I guess understand that. I know people's lives are very busy and people have a lot of other things that take up their time, but really without reading, about all we have to gather information about the world around us is what we get on television. And if our limitations that we place on ourselves of the source of this information is the liberal media, then the biggest part of what we're getting about what's taking place in the world around us is a bunch of bald-faced lies. And even when you tune in to Fox News and a few like that, you have to be kind of careful. And so it becomes, in my opinion, very important for people to carefully search out books. You can go to Amazon into their book section, thousands and thousands of books on nearly every subject that you could imagine. And so what I decided to do is to start a process of picking certain books that I think have value and do a review. Now, obviously, I'm going to do some of my books. I have, I think, 26 published books that cover everything from motorcycle safety to self-defense to how to recognize a terrorist and what to do about it if you pick up the indication that there's some person that fulfills a certain criteria, a certain action. What do you do about it? To a number of novels that cover everything from, well, one of them that I'll be doing is a story about a missionary that has been a missionary in Africa all of his life, or his adult life, and his family has passed away during the time that he's over there. One situation that occurs is that his son is killed by Muslim terrorists. Little girl dies of a disease. And then finally, his wife passes away just from being wore out from the work that they've been involved in over there. And so he comes home and doesn't really know what to do with the rest of his life. And without getting too much into the story, because that's not the book that I'm reviewing at this point, it'll come later, he feels like that even though he's in his 60s, his life is really not over yet. He still has things that God wants him to do, just doesn't know exactly what it is. So in the process of the story developing, he ends up borrowing a Jeep from an acquaintance at a Bible college in Denver, Colorado. The same guy has a little cabin up out from Golden, Colorado. He ends up there in that cabin. It's winter times, coming on Christmas. Not a very wise decision maybe to be up there at that point in time, but at any rate, there he is. And so he goes into this cabin and he's never really been involved in fasting or anything like this, but he knows that that's what he's going to have to get involved in. And so the upshot of the story is that he's up there about 2 days, and one morning he's awakened with somebody pounding on the front door of the cabin, kind of shakes him up. Not supposed to be anybody else up there. He hadn't seen anybody else. Goes to the door, and there's this big bruiser, long blonde hair. It looks like maybe a Norwegian backpacker or whatever. And as the story develops, he finds out that this is Gabriel, the angel. And one thing you'll find out as you study this is we make a lot of wrong designations, even in our English Bible, with the word angel. Angel is a job description. It's not a definition of a species. Gabriel is an angel. He's the head of God's messaging department. Michael is not an angel. What is Michael? Well, without getting too deep into the weeds on that, what Michael is a small g God. It's what the Bible calls him. Not the English version, because we have filtered a lot of the things in the Bible through our English language and have ignored what the Bible actually says about these beings. But Michael is the commander of God's armies. He's actually the chief protector of the nation of Israel, and that's other things we get to. At any rate, this guy and this missionary and Gabriel in human form, which is the way that angels normally appear. Angels don't normally appear to human beings with wings and all this business like this. And they're certainly not little baby thingies with little tiny wings playing harps and floating on clouds. That comes straight out of the damnable paganism. And that's not exactly what the Bible talks about. Anyway, and so they begin to discuss various things. Gabriel has gotten permission to answer certain questions that the missionary comes up with. At any rate, that'll be another book for another time. The book that I'm going to present shortly is one called Heaven, Hell, and the Rapture. And it's a fictional work on, we'll get into it in a minute. I won't get into it at this point in time, but several books that I'll be presenting. There'll be some of my books, as I said, but there's also going to be some other books by writers like Tom Horn. If you haven't read any of his works, I strongly advise you to do it. Let's see if I can bring these things up in this. I don't know all about how this thing works, but here's one. The Rabbis, Donald Trump and the Third Temple by Thomas Horn. Now, the Third Temple is a temple that will be built shortly after the Antichrist makes a 7-year peace treaty with the nation of Israel. There is some evidence now that a lot of the people in the nation of Israel feel like that the end, and they're not looking for the coming of Jesus Christ, they're looking for the coming of their Messiah. But one of the things that has to happen is the reinstitution of the Mosaic sacrifices, the 7 feasts. And so there is some strong evidence that Donald Trump, being extremely pro-Israel, has been involved in laying the groundwork or working with them to lay the groundwork for the development of the tribulation temple. Now, here's another one by Thomas Horn called The Messenger that we'll be reviewing. And this is a story about, without getting into it right now, about a giant satellite. And I don't mean one like we built, not a satellite, but anyway, that has been discovered by NASA to be heading for the Earth. They've given a date when it is expected to impact the Earth in 2029. And Thomas Horn had a dream or vision about that, and he came up with the same information that NASA had, but sometime before NASA had published it. And so that'll be another one that we'll be looking at. Another one here, the Wormwood Prophecy, is kind of relates to the same thing. But at any rate, that will be some of the other books that we'll be bringing to your attention in the weeks ahead. But at any rate, we're not going to get deep into those right now, because I want to talk about the book that I'm previewing for you today. And I hope I can encourage you to go to Amazon.com and I'll tell you in a few minutes how to do it. Also, let me I usually forget this, but let me encourage you to either uh, uh, like the program, or subscribe to the program wherever you're watching it. If you're watching it on Rumble, give me a Rumble or so. If you're watching it on YouTube, then you can subscribe and so forth. But that helps quite a bit in the ratings of the program, and I hope you will do it. I'll be back just right after this ad, and we'll talk about the book that I'm previewing for you today. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that little ad for the book. Now, this is the book. You saw kind of a picture of it there, but let me bring up the picture of the book. Heaven, Hell, and the Rapture, a novelty on the reality of all three. Now, basically, the book is fictional. The beginning of the book, the heaven and hell part, is about two guys that are born back in the late 20s. One of them is born on a family farm located in southern Tennessee. Strong family ties, strong Christian upbringing. The family owns, the dad is a mule trader. A lot of it is patterned after my own early life, although I was born in 1939. This is a little bit older than I am, but at any rate, my granddad was a mule trader. He had one of the largest farms in that part of North Alabama. Had a timber operation like this family did, and about 1,500 acres in cultivation, cotton and corn and sorghum and so forth, grain sorghum. And so that was the life of Ed, one of our characters. Tim is the other character, and he was born on the streets of Chicago. And about the same time period, his dad was killed in a gunfight in a bar when he was about 9 years old. His mother had to do some of the unspeakable things that many women got themselves caught into in those types of situations in order to put a little food on the table. Tim got involved in some criminal activity. And finally, the only way he could get released from jail is to immediately join the Army in 1941. And obviously, you know what was going on at that point in time. Ed also decided to join the military. His family had been a strong military family. Most of them had gained the status of officers. He wasn't interested in that. He wanted to do his time, get back and get married to his high school girlfriend and get on with life. At any rate, they both join the military, and they end up meeting on a troop ship going over to England. And later on, they both get captured and they're put in a German prison camp. The story goes on and tells some about their story and their how they got liberated and so forth. When they get liberated, they both go back to their lifestyle. Ed goes back to the family farm. In the meantime, his dad has passed away, and Ed is given a lot of the responsibility when he gets back and out of the military to take over operation of the family farm. Tim goes back to the streets of Chicago, and he spends a good part of his life over the next 40 years or so in and out of prison. And so the story, the peak of the story takes place when in their 80s, they both die. One goes to heaven, one goes to hell. I want to read just a little bit of Ed's entrance after he dies. He instantly is in heaven. Now, I'm not going to get much into it, but just a little bit so you can gather in the flavor of the program. And I'll be reading it, so I'll be looking over to the side. As a bright light fades, Ed finds himself standing on a pathway. It's unlike anything he's ever seen or felt. He personally feels all over like nothing he could ever imagine or could explain. The first thing he notices is the deep, deep sense of peace and assurance. His mind seems to reach out and embrace all that is around him. The light that seems to emanate from everything is a soft blue, but not like any blue that he's ever seen. And with each passing moment, it changes. Everything seems to throb with life and energy. The glow seems to light up everything. It's not a bright light. It's not really a low light. He can see all of the details of everything around him, even minute features. But most of all is the unbelievable sense of love. He feels as though he has finally arrived at what was always meant to be his home. The sensation of love is tangible, not just a feeling, but a solid object. Yet, it's nothing he can actually see. It's just, well, it's solid love. All right, I'll stop right there, and I want to jump over to the next page on page 72 of the book. And this is Tim's arrival at his destination. This is the one that had nothing to do with God and so forth. And he's horrified at where he is and what he sees. As the ugly darkness that gathered around his deathbed fades into blotchy blackness tinted with red flashes, Timothy is surprised to find himself standing in the middle of what looks like a pathway. Now, it's unlike anything he's ever encountered in life. It personally feels not like nothing he's ever imagined, nothing he had the language to explain. The first thing he notices is that the pathway is covered with what looks like red hot coals. The next thing he notices is the excruciating pain that he feels in his feet. The horrid pain slowly radiates all the way to the top of his head, or what he thinks is his head. It suddenly dawns on him that he's barefoot and standing in hot coals. The next thing is that the air is like molten metal. He seems to be wrapped in the burning heat. Pain is unbearable. He tries to lift 1 foot at a time out of the burning coals, but this doesn't seem to lessen the pain. He senses a deep, deep awareness of horror and aloneness. He realizes somehow that he's not really alone, but he's in a place that is totally hostile to everything he has, everything he is or is as a being. All the horror that envelops him seems to reach out and wrap itself around him with fiery tentacles. Okay. And it goes on a lot more where he is greeted by demons and people that he knew that he had committed crimes with and so forth. All right, let's go to the next one. Take me just a second to get over there. This is, we move into the rapture. In this portion of the book, I lay out the theology for the rapture of the church. And I lay it out based on what I totally believe, and I think can be proven as a pre-tribulation rapture. If you don't understand that, then this book will explain it in living color. And then I've got 5 fictional stories that 2 of them are about people. Let me get over there to it. 2 of them are about people that go in the rapture, believers in Jesus Christ, that when that time comes, when God removes the church, the born again believers, out of the earth so that he can bring his wrath upon the people in the that have still on the earth that have denied him. Kind of a little bit about their stories. Then there are 3 of them, of the stories that give the possibility of what it will be like to miss the rapture and have some of your friends take the rapture. Now, this is a very unusual little story. Take me about 5 minutes to read it. I think you'll enjoy it, but it kind of gives you a flavor of the way the this part of the book is laid out. It's called Rapture from Space. Viktor Otkov, Yuri Brazovoy, both from Russia, and Clayton Armstrong from the USA had arrived at the International Space Station 208 days, 7 hours, and 19 minutes ago. They'd been counting days since they first arrived. It had only been during the last month or so that they had really been counting the hours and the minutes. Even with all the years of intensive training, the long days in space had begun to take their toll. They were, of course, extremely busy with the many experiments. Some involved walking outside the station, spacewalking, for frankly, they were ready to get back to the good old Earth and reunite with family and friends. As exciting as the work had been at first, it had all become now a bit redundant. Their leisure time was used up by reading favorite books, listening to music, and looking at the Earth. They had been allowed to bring some of their own belongings with them, and that way they could spend time in much the same way that they might on Earth in their downtime. Viktor and Yuri had spent much of the dead time playing chess. Both of them were very good, as were many of their friends back home. They had been close family friends since they attended the university in Moscow. During their time aboard the station, they had discussed much of the history of Russia, especially interesting were the causes of the USSR breakup and how that had affected life in their beloved motherland. When they had first arrived, they had both attempted to find some common ground with their American counterpart. Well, there was much about the life that each had experienced in preparing for the fulfillment of their basic dream, that being going into space. Each one had, in their own way, begun preparing for this venture early in life. Clayton's family had been deeply involved in the Air Force, and specifically with space exploration since its development first began. However, shortly after this tour of duty began, the two Russians noticed something different and, to them, rather troubling about their new American friend. For the two Russians, being raised in the clutches of socialism, Marxism, and a godless worldview, anything smacking of God was disturbing. One, because they had no basis from which to judge any such action, and number two, because they had been taught since childhood that any such belief was a sign of weakness and perhaps of a mental malfunction. But shortly after they began to settle into this life in space, they both became extremely concerned about this American's total obsession with the Bible. Daily, he would settle into some rather remote area of the station, not easy to find, and begin to read from his Bible. Then he would pray, sometimes out loud. Most troublesome were the times when they would hear their names mentioned as he prayed. Neither man was comfortable with their names being mentioned to God, just in case there was any such thing. Probably the most upsetting situation came when, on one occasion, Yuri overheard Clayton praying out loud. Now get ready for this. He was praying in perfect Russian. As far as he knew, this American knew no Russian. They knew that he did speak Spanish, but Russian? When Yuri mentioned this to Viktor, he was as much in disbelief as was Yuri. When Yuri asked Viktor if he heard what Clayton was saying, his answer was even more disconcerting. Yuri answered in doubt and even with a bit of embarrassment, well, as far as I could tell, he was praying for us and our safety during our soon return to Earth. They both decided not to mention this strange matter again, so time continued to move toward their date of relief. There would be 5 other members of the team joining them in about 3 weeks. There would even be one scientist from Saudi Arabia, which was a first. And there was about to be some serious changes aboard the space station. When Yuri was in college at Moscow State University, he took an elective course on religions of the world. His maternal grandmother had been a member of the Russian Orthodox Church. For the most part, the church was very stiff and rigid. However, his grandmother seemed very vocal about her religion. She seemed to have a somewhat personal relationship with God sort of like Clayton did. So on several occasions, he would discuss with Clayton what seemed to be a very personal relationship that his grandmother had. These discussions generally went on while Victor was asleep or busy on some project that took him to some isolated part of the space station. So it was after a number of these secret meetings that Victor had taken the radical step of inviting Jesus Christ to come into his heart, forgive him of his sins, and he had committed his life to Christ. Since then, he had spent quite a bit of time reflecting on how exactly he was going to handle this when he got home. He felt his wife just might be somewhat receptive, but not the rest of his family. His grandmother had long since passed away. Oh well, he'd address all that when the time came. However, there was another situation that would develop before he would need to concern himself with any of that. Yuri had gotten somewhat suspicious about Victor. He had noticed that he was spending more and more time talking with this American. He wasn't exactly sure what they were talking about. But on several occasions, he had noticed that when they were talking, Clayton would have his Bible open, and he seemed to be reading from it. Victor seemed to be listening intently. He must remember to ask Victor about it as soon as this mission was over. This particular day aboard the space station dawned like any other day, except something wasn't right. Today it was Clayton's duty to awaken first and get everything up and running for the day's work. It was about 6:30 p.m. They were on the dark side of the earth, and everything was still set up for sleep time. In other words, it was dark in the cabin, which was not as it should be. Yuri called out to Clayton. No answer. He called out to Victor, louder this time. Nothing. That was not right. He got up, walked over to the master light switch for the cabin and flipped it on. The cabin immediately lit up. He sort of floated over to Clayton's bunk. Each crewman had to sleep with a strap around his sleeping bag so he wouldn't float around while he was sleeping. Clayton's sleeping bag was securely attached to his bunk. But where was Clayton? The bag was empty. And as far as he could tell, the American was no longer on board the space station. To make sure, he quickly checked the space suit locker. All three suits were there. His mind suddenly seemed to grow numb. What had happened? Quickly, he stepped over to the other sleeping pod, the one where his friend Victor should be. He was stunned. There was his sleeping bag, and exactly like with Clayton, there was his sleeping clothes neatly lying inside the bag, but empty. For a moment, he stood gazing in disbelief. Something must have happened to his mind, but no, he seemed to be in control of his mental facilities. He seemed to be in control of his mental faculties. It must be something else. Quickly, he moved over to the communications panel. He flipped the switch controlling the onboard TV monitor. What he saw was total confusion. The channel was preset to Fox News. The picture showed what seemed to be total confusion. The picture flashed from scene to scene, from place to place in the United States, in his nation, across the world. Every highway was stacked up with cars, many of them wrecked. One scene showed what seemed to be an airliner that had crashed into some downtown area. What was going on? Had World War III broken out at last? Frantically, he put on his headset, keyed the mic that should have put him in touch with mission control, but no one answered his frantic call. He switched frequencies to his own Moscow mission control, and after several attempts, a voice answered his call. "What has happened?" Yuri screamed into the mic. "Are we at war?" The voice on the other end answered, trembling. "Commander Brezovoy, we do not know. Millions of people from all over the world have simply vanished. There is total confusion. All of our leaders are in session trying to discover what to do. Yes, my two fellow comrades here are also gone. I'm alone in the space station. What must I do? When will the shuttle be sent here to get me? Please, I must know. After a long time of silence, the voice on the other end returned. Returned to deliver a message of horror to Yuri. Commander, I've just been told that there are currently no plans to send the shuttle to get you. At least, not at any time soon. Yuri began to scream, but there was no one to listen. Okay, and the other stories I think are just as interesting as that. I think you'll enjoy them. All right, that's enough on that book. I want to present a little ad to encourage you to pick up another book that's just been released. Let me play the promo for it and then encourage you to get on skywatchtvstore.com and get these exciting books. You'll be amazed at what you'll learn.
There were giants in the earth in those days. And also after that. It was a time of gods and dragons.
This was supernatural war between Jesus, God, and the old gods.
We live in the final stage of a war that began before God said, "Let there be light."
The gods of ancient Sumer.
These giants are all through the Bible.
The things that are going on in the world right now, I'm sorry, but the writers, they're out.
Now, a fresh look at the end times that reveals the prophecy of the giants at Armageddon. Names the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse already loose in the world today.
These entities are real entities and not just metaphors or
Right.
symbols.
And they're all named.
Unmasks the ancient dragons who walk the earth during the Great Tribulation.
A primordial entity such as Kronos or Chaos, Leviathan, Tiamat.
His breath kindles coals and a flame comes forth from his mouth. What is he describing here, if not a dragon?
And unveils hidden prophecies of their ultimate destruction. Giants, Gods, and Dragons by Sharon K. Gilbert and Derek P. Gilbert. New from Defender Publishing.
The Bible is more fantastic than we were ever taught. In our new book, Giants, Gods, and Dragons, Sharon and I show that the giants of Genesis, the gods of Egypt, Canaan, and Babylon, and the dragons described by Job, Isaiah, and John were not only real, they're all through the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. This is a fresh look at end times prophecy that names the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and reveals hidden prophecies of the ultimate destruction of the Nephilim, the death of the gods, and the very last enemy destroyed when God creates the new heaven and new earth. Please take advantage of this special Giants, Gods, and Dragons offer from Skywatch TV because we've assembled more than 27 hours of teachings on DVD to go along with our new book, including Wars of the Gods Volume 1, Search for the Titans, as you follow us from the Holy Land to the giants' tombs on the mysterious island of Sardinia. Wars of the Gods Volume 2, Search for the Rephaim, a 2-DVD set featuring the first look at the Serpent Mound of Bashan, a tour inside the central core of the megalithic monument to the dead, Gilgal Rephaim, and 4 hours of bonus teachings from me, Pastor Carl Gallups, and Messianic Rabbi Zev Porat. Plus, This is War, 6 hours of never-before-released teachings recorded live in California last fall. Unmasking the Ancient Gods, 6 presentations by Sharon and me at the 2017 Blessed Hope Prophecy Conference. The 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, 10 programs from our weekly series Unraveling Revelation on the Riders of Revelation 6, and the Battle Against Giants, Gods, and Dragons. 4 hours of teachings on spiritual warfare and the prophesied destruction of the supernatural enemies of God. All of this, the new book, Giants, Gods, and Dragons, plus 7 DVDs with 27 hours of video on the supernatural war in which you and your family are deployed, is yours for a gift of just $35 plus shipping. Don't miss this offer. Call the Skywatch TV store at 844-750-4985. That's 844-750-4985. Or log on to skywatchtvstore.com.
Okay, did that spark your interest? Believe it or not, just as they've said, we have been we have failed to pick up a lot of information in the Bible. Let me make it clear to you. The plan of salvation is not touched. Salvation is still by faith through grace, not of works, should any man boast. Jesus is the one way to salvation. Never forget that. But there are a lot of things, for instance, things like in Psalms the 82nd chapter. I encourage you to read that. It talks about God having a meeting with his council and with other gods. When you talk about, or when the Bible talks about Creator God, it's Yahweh, capital G. But his counsel involves those that he has assigned to help him. God doesn't need any help. He chooses to have helpers. He's chosen to allow you and I to be helpers in his plan. That's his father nature. But in many places in the Bible that we'll be covering refer to members of his council as B'nai Elohim, sons of God, gods in their own right, but lesser gods with a lowercase g. We'll talk about that later. Hope you'll join us next time for our next book.